Hello, my name is Olivia Whitman, and I'm 29 years old. It all started when my adoptive mother clutched a pregnancy test and shouted, "I can have real children." From that moment on, I went from daughter to placeholder, erased piece by piece while their biological son became the heir. But what they didn't know was that I was building my own foundation, one strong enough to outlast all of them. Before I tell you how I turned rejection into power, please comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'm sitting in my Manhattan office right now, looking at blueprints that could change everything. And all I can think about is being 7 years old in my dad's studio. Robert Whitman, my adoptive father, used to lift me onto his drafting table and say, "Olivia, architecture is about creating something permanent, something that can't be taken away." The irony would hit me 22 years later when I realized I was about to take away everything he thought was permanent. The Whitman estate in the Hamptons was Robert's way of showing off. 12 acres of glass and steel overlooking the Atlantic, designed to make you feel small and impressed. Everything screamed money. Imported marble, infinity pool that seemed to pour into the ocean. Robert built it to intimidate wealthy clients into paying ridiculous fees. And it worked. What I didn't understand was that he'd also built it as the perfect stage for his ideal family performance. And I was just filling a role until the real star showed up. Victoria moved through that house like she was floating, always in silk robes that cost more than most people's rent, always smelling like expensive perfume. She'd been a model before a riding accident messed up her back and made it impossible to have kids. Or so the doctors told her. Adopting me was supposed to be her consolation prize. "You're my little miracle," she'd whisper while braiding my hair, but even as a kid, I could hear something hollow in her voice, like she was reading lines from a script. Robert's studio was my favorite place. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive drafting tools, precise blueprints spread like treasure maps. He'd let me climb up there, my tiny hands tracing lines, while he explained how buildings stayed up, how foundations worked. "You have natural talent," he'd tell me, and I'd glow with pride. I had no idea he was studying me like an experiment, cataloging how useful I might be later. My bedroom was every 7-year-old's dream. Corner room with ocean views, custom built-ins Robert designed just for me, lavender walls with stars on the ceiling, bookshelves filled with architecture books Victoria read to me like bedtime stories. "Someday you'll be famous like these architects," she'd promise, tucking me in. I believed every word. I didn't notice her eyes were always distant when she talked about my future. Weekend mornings were like performances. Robert would spread blueprints across the dining table while entertaining clients over coffee, and I'd sit quietly sketching my own designs with secret passages that made sense to my kid brain. Robert would sometimes show my drawings to clients as examples of natural architectural instinct. They'd laugh and say I was adorable, and he'd beam like he was showing off a prize-winning dog. But the warning signs were everywhere. Helena Whitman, Robert's mother, visited monthly, and somehow never included me in family photos. Always some excuse, always a reason I happened to be elsewhere when cameras came out. Victoria's friends would ask about my real parents, in voices they thought were too quiet for me to hear, and Victoria would give vague answers about doing good deeds before changing the subject. Robert kept my childhood drawings pinned to his office corkboard next to his architecture awards. I thought that meant I was important to him. What I didn't realize was that he was documenting my progress like a science project, tracking my development for his own benefit, not celebrating my creativity out of genuine love. Every compliment, every lesson, every moment of attention was an investment in his future plans, not real parental affection. There was this guest room that stayed ready all through my early childhood, like they were expecting permanent visitors instead of weekend guests. Victoria would sometimes stand in that doorway with her hand pressed to her flat stomach, this strange look on her face that I'd later recognize as desperate longing. She wasn't mourning her inability to have children. She was counting down until she could replace me with something better. Those first years felt so solid, so unshakable. I had parents who seemed to understand me, who encouraged the part of me that saw the world in terms of buildings and spaces. I had a bedroom that was actually mine, not just another temporary placement. I thought I was building something permanent, something that couldn't be destroyed or changed. But real love doesn't come with conditions. Real parents don't treat their children like temporary entertainment. Real families don't require constant auditions for continued membership. I was desperately grateful for the first stable home I'd ever known, and I mistook their calculated kindness for the unconditional love I'd been craving my entire life. The foundation I thought we were building together was actually quicksand, designed to swallow me whole the moment something better came along. And trust me, something better was definitely coming. If you're adopted, or if you've ever felt like you don't quite belong in your own family, your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally teach us that love always comes with a price tag. Drop a comment if this story hits close to home. Have you ever felt like you were auditioning for love in your own family? Let's talk about it. There I was, 11 years old, building this intricate treehouse model in Robert's studio, when Victoria burst through the door clutching a pregnancy test like she'd won the lottery, full-on sobbing and laughing simultaneously, clinging to Robert like he'd saved her from drowning. The doctors were wrong, she kept gasping. I can have children. I can have real children. The way she emphasized real hit me like a punch to the stomach. Watching your entire world explode in real time is unforgettable. Robert lifted Victoria off her feet, spinning her around while my blueprints scattered everywhere. And for the first time, I understood I'd been living in a temporary situation, not a permanent family. They were complete without me. They had always been complete without me. I was just the emotional placeholder while they waited for their biological child to show up. Olivia, you're going to be a big sister, Victoria announced, but her eyes never left Robert's face. Never once acknowledged the kid being demoted from daughter to babysitter in a single sentence. That's when I knew everything I'd believed about my place in this family had been a beautiful lie. The pregnancy consumed everything. Victoria's morning sickness meant I ate breakfast in my room, because my cereal smell made her nauseous. Robert's evening drawing sessions with me? Gone. Victoria needed him researching pediatricians and private schools. They talked about this baby's future with intensity they'd never applied to my education, mapping out privilege they'd never bothered providing for me. I threw myself into designing the perfect nursery. 3 weeks creating detailed blueprints, custom built-ins, perfect lighting, even a reading nook where I could tell bedtime stories to my future sibling. Every measurement precise, every detail calculated. When I presented that folder to my parents, my hands were literally shaking with nervous excitement. Victoria barely glanced at my pages before dismissing them entirely. That's sweet, honey, but we've hired Jennifer Morrison to design the nursery. She's a professional. Robert didn't even look up. Olivia, this is serious business. Adults handle important decisions. Jennifer Morrison charged $15,000. My 3 weeks of work wasn't worth 30 seconds of consideration. That night, I found my blueprints in the kitchen garbage, coffee grounds staining the corner where I'd signed my name in careful lettering. That's when it hit me. My architectural opinions would never matter in this house again. I was being systematically erased to make room for their real child. Helena Whitman started showing up every weekend, bringing elaborate gifts for her first real grandchild, and launching into speeches about Whitman family genetics. She'd park herself on the sofa with one hand resting on Victoria's belly, discussing bloodlines like she was planning royal succession. Adopted children can be lovely, she'd say, while I pretended to read nearby, but nothing compares to your own flesh and blood. The bond is just deeper. Victoria's entire personality shifted. The woman who'd once encouraged my architectural interests could suddenly only discuss prenatal vitamins and ultrasound appointments. She installed blackout curtains, bought a white noise machine, and informed me that my piano practice would be limited because stress isn't good for the baby. I wasn't allowed to run upstairs, play music after 8 p.m., or have friends over, because everything might disturb Victoria's delicate condition. Robert became Victoria's devoted servant, anticipating her every need while forgetting he had another child who might need occasional attention. He installed an elaborate baby monitoring system, researched expensive pediatricians, spent evenings reading parenting books with the same intensity he'd once applied to architectural journals. When I tried showing him my latest design project, he'd glance for 2 seconds before returning to his pregnancy preparation research. The baby shower was like a Broadway production. 80 women under white silk tents, cooing over tiny designer clothes while I served drinks and collected wrapping paper like hired help. I wasn't invited to participate as family, but wasn't excluded either. I existed in this humiliating middle space, useful enough to work, not important enough to celebrate. Victoria's so fortunate to finally have her own baby, I heard Mrs. Ashworth tell someone. Adoption is charitable, of course, but there's nothing like carrying your own child. Victoria glowed through the entire event, while I carried food platters and tried ignoring pitying looks from guests who clearly understood my changed status. That night, I designed my first building intended for demolition, a temporary structure that served its purpose beautifully before gracefully disappearing when something better came along. I didn't realize I was designing a blueprint for my own role in the Whitman family, but my subconscious understood. I was being systematically erased to make room for their real child. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like you were being replaced in your own family, I need you to understand something. It's not about you. It's about them. It's about their inability to love more than one person at a time, their need to rank children instead of cherishing them equally. You are not disposable, even when people who should protect you treat you like you are. Have you ever been made to feel like a temporary guest in your own home? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes all the difference. Blake Thomas Whitman made his entrance on Valentine's Day. Because the universe has twisted humor, weighing 7 pounds 6 ounces of absolute perfection. The moment Robert held him up to that nursery window, tears streaming while he whispered, "My son, my actual son," to the glass. I knew everything I'd believed about belonging to this family had been an elaborate 11-year performance to keep me compliant until their real child arrived. Victoria couldn't stop staring at Blake like he was a religious miracle. She'd trace his features with trembling fingers, sobbing about how perfectly he resembled Robert as a baby. "Look at his hands," she kept gasping to Helena Whitman, who'd materialize within hours like a vulture sensing fresh inheritance opportunities. "They're identical to Robert's hands. He's going to be an architect, just like his father." The way she said his father, possessive, triumphant, final, made it clear Robert had never really been my father at all. The hospital room filled with flowers and champagne and congratulations from every prominent Hamptons family, all celebrating the true Whitman heir. While I stood in the corner holding a teddy bear I'd bought with allowance money. The nurses cooed about Blake's thick blonde hair and bright blue eyes, genetic gifts that marked him as legitimate in ways my brown hair and green eyes never could. I realized I'd been living as an imposter in my own life. Coming home was like entering a different house. Blake's needs now dictated every decision, and my comfort became irrelevant to family planning. Victoria hired a night nurse, because Blake's sleep was too precious to risk disrupting. She installed monitoring systems tracking his breathing while ignoring my questions about homework help and weekend plans. My old changing table, hastily moved to storage when the professional nursery designer took over, was suddenly unsafe for Blake. Robert bought a new one costing more than my entire bedroom furniture. Everything I'd used as a baby was apparently not good enough for the real child. Blake's first smile at 6 weeks generated more excitement than my National Honor Society acceptance the month before. Victoria called every relative sharing news of his advanced social development, while my academic achievement certificate disappeared into a kitchen drawer. When Blake rolled over at 4 months, Robert took a personal day to document the milestone. Meanwhile, he'd missed my school architecture competition because it conflicted with an important client meeting. Professional portraits were scheduled monthly to capture every stage of Blake's development, the same photographer who documented celebrity babies for magazines. Our house filled with expensive frames, showcasing Blake's perfect features. All those casual snapshots from my childhood, drugstore prints in basic frames, got quietly moved to closets to make wall space for Blake's artistic documentation. Helena Whitman established Blake's trust fund before he was 6 months old. She consulted financial advisors about investment strategies, funding his Harvard education, first house, whatever else a Whitman heir might need. She discussed his inheritance like planning a coronation, mapping out his future role in family business while treating me like temporary staff who could be dismissed anytime. Robert started bringing Blake to construction sites in an expensive baby carrier, pointing out structural elements to an infant who couldn't focus his eyes yet. Future partner, he'd tell clients, bouncing Blake while explaining building techniques. But he'd stopped taking me to construction sites the moment Victoria's pregnancy advanced past first trimester. Blake was apparently immune to safety concerns that had suddenly made me too vulnerable for field experience. Blake's first birthday required event coordinators, a petting zoo, and enough custom decorations to supply a small wedding. 200 guests celebrated this kid's milestone achievement of surviving 12 months. Robert's toast about watching his son grow into the next generation of Whitman excellence was delivered while I applauded politely in the background. Remembering my first birthday had been celebrated with grocery store cake and maybe 10 family friends. By age 2, Blake owned more toys than most kids see in a lifetime. He had a college savings account exceeding small countries' GDP, and he'd never heard no applied to any request. I watched him develop into this beautiful, confident little boy who understood without question that he was the center of his parents' universe, and I tried not to hate him for effortlessly achieving everything I'd spent 11 years desperately working to earn. The house transformed around Blake's presence. Safety gates, outlet covers, corner guards. Every room revolved around his protection and comfort. My art supplies got locked away because Blake might get into them. My study space gradually got consumed by his overflow of educational toys and development equipment. Even my bedroom wasn't sacred. Victoria needed storage for Blake's seasonal clothing and backup toys, so my desk got shoved against the wall. Victoria's friends competed to give Blake impressive gifts and educational opportunities, discussing his development like political strategists analyzing polling data. He's so intellectually curious, they'd gush, watching Blake bang toys together with standard toddler enthusiasm. Look how he examines everything. He's definitely inherited Robert's analytical mind. I'd listen while doing homework at the kitchen counter, invisible as furniture. When Blake turned 3, his birthday celebration got featured in Hampton's magazine as elegant family entertaining. Professional photographs, custom decorations, gourmet catering, curated guest list of socialites and business leaders. Victoria wore a designer dress costing more than my entire wardrobe. Robert gave interviews about pride in his remarkable son. And me? I got cropped out of most pictures to maintain aesthetic perfection of their family portrait. The magazine article mentioned the Whitman family's beautiful home and precious heir without acknowledging they had other children. I'd been successfully erased from their public narrative as completely as I'd been demoted in their private affections. If you're the older sibling who got pushed aside when the real child arrived, I see you. If you've watched parents celebrate achievements from your younger sibling that they ignored when you accomplished the same things, I feel that pain. You didn't deserve to be treated like you were less valuable just because you weren't their biological child. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you watched a sibling get opportunities and attention never offered to you? Your story matters, and you're not alone. At 15, I made a decision that changed everything. I was going to work for Patricia Brennan, Robert's biggest competitor and the one person systematically destroying his reputation for 20 years. When I announced my summer internship plans over dinner, Robert's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. "You want to work for Patricia Brennan?" he asked, his voice carrying the same outrage he'd use if I'd announced plans to burn down his office. "That woman has been trying to destroy my business for decades." Victoria dropped her fork with a clatter that made 3-year-old Blake giggle, and I smiled sweetly while explaining that Patricia had offered me actual responsibility instead of the glorified babysitting that passed for family contribution in the Whitman household. The look on their faces was absolutely priceless. Patricia Brennan ran her firm like a military operation against environmental destruction. Every project was designed to prove luxury, and sustainability weren't mutually exclusive. Her office walls were covered with energy efficiency awards displayed like hunting trophies, and she talked about buildings with passionate intensity other people reserve for their children. "Architecture is warfare," she told me on my first day, spreading blueprints across her standing desk. "Every structure either fights climate change or accelerates it. There's no neutral ground." Victoria's fury about my summer job was magnificent to witness, though she tried disguising her rage as maternal concern, while Blake colored in expensive activity books and demanded snacks every 10 minutes. "This is betrayal, Olivia," she hissed, during one kitchen confrontation. "Families support each other, they don't work for the enemy." But her definition of family support seemed to involve me providing free childcare for her precious son while she attended yoga classes and charity luncheons. Robert's reaction was more complex. This fascinating mix of professional outrage and grudging respect for my strategic thinking. Patricia Brennan is brilliant, he admitted during one increasingly tense conversation. She's also ruthless and manipulative. Don't think she hired you for your talent, Olivia. She hired you because you're my daughter, and she wants to humiliate me. He was completely wrong. Patricia had hired me because my sustainable design portfolio was more innovative than most graduate students produced. My first assignment was redesigning the firm's entire operational system to achieve zero waste production. I had to analyze every supply chain, calculate environmental impact for hundreds of materials and processes. Patricia watched me work with focused attention, occasionally asking questions that pushed my thinking into unexplored territory. Why accept sustainable when you could demand regenerative, she'd challenge, and I'd return to calculations with renewed determination to exceed every expectation. The other interns were graduate students from prestigious programs who initially resented the high school student taking workspace they felt they'd earned through years of advanced study. But resentment shifted to respect when my waste management redesign got implemented company-wide and immediately reduced operational costs by 40%, while earning the firm a State Environmental Achievement Award. Working with Patricia's team meant discovering that architecture could function as social justice activism, not just aesthetic entertainment for wealthy clients. We designed affordable housing that produced surplus energy, neighborhood centers that purified local water supplies, office complexes that improved air quality for entire city blocks. Every project had to demonstrate measurable positive impact on human health and environmental sustainability. My housing designs started winning internal competitions, consistently beating submissions from students with years more experience and educational resources I'd never accessed. When Patricia entered my affordable housing concept in a national student competition, my first-place victory generated newspaper coverage describing me as a rising architectural prodigy with revolutionary environmental vision. Victoria's reaction to my competition win was a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation disguised as maternal pride. Her society friends were impressed that her daughter had achieved national recognition, but confused why I was working for Robert's rival instead of learning from the most successful architect in the Hamptons. Victoria smiled tightly through congratulations while redirecting conversations toward Blake's preschool achievements, ensuring my professional success never overshadowed her biological child's milestones. Robert surprised me by showing up to the award ceremony, sitting in the back while I accepted the trophy, and gave a speech about designing for environmental justice. Afterward, he waited outside with hands shoved in pockets, looking more uncertain than I'd seen him since Blake's birth transformed him into this confident patriarch. "That was impressive, Olivia," he said finally. "I didn't realize you'd developed such sophisticated design philosophy." Patricia encouraged me to apply for early admission to MIT's architecture program, promising recommendation letters that would position me as one of the most promising young sustainable designers in the country. "You're solving problems that most architects ignore until they're established enough to care about legacy," she told me. "Don't waste that vision on programs that will try to convince you environmental responsibility is optional." But applying to college meant confronting harsh financial reality. Blake's trust fund was substantial enough to cover medical school, while my education fund consisted of babysitting money and summer job savings. The college application process revealed the cruel mathematics of adoptive versus biological children in ways that made my stomach clench with familiar panic. Helena's reaction to my college plans was delivered with surgical precision during one weekly family dinner. "How lovely that Olivia has found activities to occupy her time," she said, cutting salmon with deliberate slowness. "Though architecture can be quite challenging for young women, perhaps interior design would be more suitable for someone in her position." Robert said nothing. Victoria nodded politely, and I imagined designing a building specifically engineered to collapse on grandmothers with toxic opinions. My summer at Brennan Design ended with an offer to continue working part-time during school, plus Patricia's promise of full-time employment after college if I maintained my commitment to revolutionary sustainable design. "You have something most architects never develop," she told me. "You understand that buildings aren't just structures, they're statements about what kind of world we're choosing to create." I accepted her offer without consulting my parents, and I started making my own statements about the kind of future I intended to build, with or without their approval. Here's what I learned. Sometimes the people who are supposed to support your dreams are the ones who will try hardest to limit them. Sometimes you have to choose between keeping peace in your family and pursuing your own potential. I chose my potential, and it was the first decision that was entirely my own. What's one dream you've been afraid to pursue because of what others might think? Share it in the comments. Sometimes saying it out loud is the first step toward making it real. I turned 18 on a Tuesday in April, and Victoria forgot until Thursday. Blake's preschool teacher casually mentioned seeing my name on a birthday list somewhere, triggering Victoria's performative panic about being an inadequate mother. "Oh my God, Olivia, I'm so sorry," she gasped, rushing into my room with a hastily wrapped jewelry box from the expensive boutique in town. With Blake's soccer tryouts and the charity gala planning, this week just completely escaped me. The necklace was beautiful and expensive, and I knew I'd wear it exactly once. But her apology felt more like an itemized explanation of why Blake's activities would always matter more than my existence. That's when I knew, really knew, that I was done competing for scraps of attention from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth their full consideration. MIT's acceptance letter arrived the same day Blake managed his first successful somersault, and the cosmic timing couldn't have been more perfectly symbolic. Robert was filming Blake's athletic achievement with professional equipment, while Victoria cried with maternal joy and called Helena to share the momentous news. Meanwhile, I'm standing in the kitchen doorway, holding my future in a thin envelope, completely invisible to the people who were supposed to celebrate my success. "MIT, full scholarship," I announced to the room. Robert glanced up long enough to mutter, "That's nice, honey," before returning his attention to Blake's infinitely more important tumbling skills. That moment crystallized everything for me. I could cure cancer, win a Nobel Prize, or design buildings that save the planet, and it would never matter as much to them as Blake learning to do a somersault. The scholarship covered tuition and room and board, but MIT was expensive beyond official costs. Books, lab fees, supplies, and 1,000 small expenses that separated scholarship students from wealthier classmates. When I mentioned needing financial help with startup costs, Victoria suggested I could take out loans like normal students do. Meanwhile, Blake's college fund was being managed by financial advisors who'd been planning his Harvard admissions since before he could walk. Patricia Brennan's recommendation letters read like love letters to my potential. She described my work as revolutionary thinking from a student who understands architecture as moral imperative, and predicted I would transform how the industry approaches environmental responsibility. Her passionate advocacy, combined with my competition victories and portfolio, impressed MIT enough to offer me a full ride that would completely change my life trajectory. Robert's goodbye was awkward and perfunctory, delivered between urgent phone calls about a client crisis that apparently couldn't wait for his daughter's departure to college. "Good luck at school, Olivia," he said, briefly patting my shoulder with the same casual attention he'd give a family friend's child. "Study hard and remember you're representing the Whitman name." It was exactly the kind of impersonal send-off you'd offer someone you barely knew. Victoria hugged me with theatrical emotion while Blake clung to her legs, crying because my suitcases were blocking his view of the television. She immediately turned her attention to comforting her real child's minor inconvenience, and I realized this was probably the last time I'd witnessed their family dynamics as anything other than an outsider looking in. Moving into my MIT dorm felt like stepping through a portal into an alternate universe, where my ideas were taken seriously by people who didn't know anything about my complicated family history. My roommate Lisa was a biomedical engineering major whose parents had immigrated from Korea with nothing and built a successful medical practice through decades of sacrifice. "My parents tell everyone they meet about MIT," she said, helping me unpack. "They're probably more excited about this than I am." The architecture studio was intimidating in ways I hadn't expected. Most classmates had attended elite prep schools with sophisticated architecture programs, studied abroad with famous architects, and spoke casually about family connections throughout the industry. I was the scholarship kid from a family that designed houses for rich people, and my sustainable design focus was considered interesting but impractical by some traditionalists. Professor Elena Rodriguez taught our intro studio with the intensity of someone training future world leaders. Her first assignment was designed to separate serious students from those treating architecture as a creative hobby. Design a space that solves a real problem, she told us, but the problem cannot be purely aesthetic. I want innovation that matters, not decoration that impresses. While other students designed meditation gardens and art galleries, I designed emergency housing that disaster victims could assemble using basic tools and locally available materials. My project earned the highest grade in the class, and a personal meeting with Professor Rodriguez, who wanted to understand my background and motivations for connecting architecture with social justice at such a young age. Working 3 jobs while maintaining a demanding course load meant no time for the social aspects of college that other students took for granted. Friday nights giving campus tours, weekends tutoring high school students, weekday evenings serving tables at an upscale restaurant near campus. My classmates discussed spring break trips to Europe, while I calculated whether I could afford new drafting supplies. But the isolation was worth it when my professors started treating me like a legitimate architect, rather than a student experimenting with ideas. My designs consistently earned top marks, and my sustainable focus began influencing other students who'd never considered environmental impact as a design priority. You're changing how this entire program thinks about architecture, Professor Rodriguez told me during a midterm review. Victoria called once monthly, usually when Blake was napping and she had 15 minutes of uninterrupted time. Our conversations followed a predictable pattern, her updating me about Blake's milestones, while asking generic questions about my classes that required no real engagement with my life. She never asked about my design projects, my professors, my career goals, or anything more substantial than dormitory food quality. By the end of freshman year, I'd made Dean's List, won the Departmental Award for Innovation in Sustainable Design, and been invited to join a research team working on affordable housing for climate refugees. I was building something unshakable and meaningful, something that gave my life purpose beyond seeking approval from people who'd never valued my contributions anyway. For the first time since Blake's arrival transformed me from daughter to babysitter, I felt genuinely powerful instead of desperately grateful. I didn't need anyone's permission to continue growing into the person I was meant to become. Here's what I want you to understand. You are not obligated to keep auditioning for love from people who've already decided you're not enough. You are not required to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You have every right to build a life that reflects your actual value, not their limited perception of it. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to stop seeking approval from people who are never going to give it anyway. Sometimes leaving is the only way to truly arrive at who you're meant to be. What's one way you've had to choose yourself over keeping others comfortable? Share your story in the comments. Your courage might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real talk about family, success, and finding your own way. By 22, I'd graduated MIT summa cum laude and landed a position at Foster Plus Partners in London, one of the most prestigious architecture firms in the world. Norman Foster himself became my mentor, and within 2 years I was leading projects that most architects don't touch until they're 40. My specialty? Luxury buildings with net zero carbon footprints. I was proving that you could have both beauty and environmental responsibility, and the industry was taking notice. Architectural Digest featured me as 30 under 30 visionary, calling my work revolutionary sustainable design that doesn't sacrifice elegance for ethics. The article included photos of my projects: a carbon-negative resort in Costa Rica, affordable housing that generated surplus energy, office buildings that purified city air. When that magazine hit newsstands, Robert called me for the first time in 3 years. "Congratulations, Olivia," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I had no idea you'd achieved so much." But here's the thing about success. It has a way of making people who ignored you suddenly very interested in your achievements. Helena Whitman, who'd spent years telling everyone I was just the adopted one, started mentioning my accomplishments at her bridge club. Victoria began casually dropping my name in conversations with her society friends. "Oh yes, our Olivia is doing quite well in London," she'd say, as if she'd been supportive all along. I started my own firm at 25, Reed Adaptive Architecture, with my business partner, Marcus Chen, an environmental engineer who shared my vision of buildings that actually healed communities instead of just impressing them. Our first project was converting an abandoned warehouse into affordable housing with solar technology and rainwater collection systems. The waiting list for our services grew to 6 months, then a year, then 18 months. Blake was 13 now, and occasionally he'd find my work online and show it to Robert. Through mutual friends, I learned that Robert had started following my career obsessively, keeping copies of every article written about my projects. He'd apparently told his clients that I was following in the family tradition, conveniently forgetting that he'd never supported my sustainable focus and had actively discouraged my environmental advocacy. That's when I learned Blake's 14th birthday was approaching. Robert was planning this massive celebration at the Hamptons estate, with the entire architecture industry elite invited. Clients, competitors, press, everyone who mattered in our world. The guest list read like a who's who of East Coast luxury design. And of course, I wasn't invited. I saw the whole thing unfolding on social media, the planning, the preparations, the excitement. But instead of feeling hurt this time, I felt something else entirely. Opportunity. I had an idea that would either bring my family together or destroy what little remained of our relationship forever. Either way, I was done being invisible. I decided to give Blake a gift that would showcase exactly what I'd built without them, and exactly what they'd lost when they chose biology over loyalty. Not revenge exactly, more like architectural justice. The plan started forming in my mind like a blueprint taking shape. I was going to design something that would make them understand, once and for all, what it means to build something permanent that can't be taken away. Something that would force them to see me not as the adopted afterthought, but as the architect who'd surpassed everything they'd ever dreamed of achieving. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, you know that feeling when you finally have the power to show them exactly who you've become. That moment when you realize you don't need their approval anymore because you've built something so much bigger than their small-minded limitations. Tell me in the comments, have you ever reached a point where you stopped needing validation from people who never believed in you? What did that breakthrough moment feel like? The gift I designed for Blake wasn't just a treehouse. It was a masterpiece of sustainable architecture scaled down to childhood wonder. I'm talking about a $25,000 custom structure with solar panels, rainwater collection, climbing walls, telescope dome, and secret compartments that would make any kid feel like they own their own private world. But here's what made it special. Every detail was designed around Blake's actual interests, not just expensive materials meant to impress adults. I spent weeks researching Blake through social media, learning that he loved science experiments, building with Legos, and surprisingly, he seemed lonely despite all his material abundance. Victoria had overscheduled him with activities, but he rarely had friends over, rarely had unstructured time to just be a kid. The treehouse I designed would be his sanctuary, a place where he could invite friends, conduct experiments, read books, or just escape from the pressure of being the perfect Whitman heir. Blake's sanctuary included sustainable features that would teach him about environmental responsibility while giving him independence his parents' helicopter parenting never allowed. The structure would be built from reclaimed wood, powered by solar energy, equipped with a small lab area for his science interests, and designed with accessibility features so he could comfortably host friends from school. But here's the deeper plan. This wasn't just about giving Blake an amazing gift. This was about demonstrating to my family that success means lifting others up, not tearing them down. That real love is expressed through thoughtful generosity, not conditional approval. That I'd learned to be the kind of family member they'd never been to me. I hired a local craftsman team to build during Blake's school hours, coordinating with landscaping to minimize impact on Robert's precious garden design. The installation would be completed the day before his birthday party, timed for maximum impact, when all those industry professionals would be there to witness it. When I called Robert to discuss the birthday surprise, his reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Surprise, confusion, and something that might have been genuine emotion. "You want to build Blake a treehouse?" he asked. "I mean, that's incredibly generous, Olivia. He's going to be thrilled." For the first time in years, Robert's voice carried real warmth when he spoke to me. Victoria was initially suspicious. She'd trained herself to look for ulterior motives in everything I did. but when I showed her the detailed plans, her resistance melted. This is beautiful, she said, studying the blueprints with the same careful attention she'd once given to interior design magazines. Blake is going to absolutely love this. The real test came when Blake himself saw the plans. His reaction was pure, unfiltered excitement, jumping up and down, asking a million questions about the climbing wall and the telescope dome, and whether he could really have friends sleep over in the treehouse. "This is the coolest thing anyone's ever built for me," he said, hugging me tighter than he had since he was little. That hug reminded me why I was doing this. Not for Robert's approval or Victoria's acknowledgement, but because Blake was my little brother, and he deserved to know that someone in his family loved him enough to pay attention to who he actually was, not just who they wanted him to become. The construction team worked like magic. Every day when Blake came home from school, more of his treehouse had appeared, and every day his excitement grew. Victoria started taking photos of the progress, posting them on social media with captions about her incredibly talented daughter. Robert brought clients by to see the construction, clearly proud of the sophisticated design and craftsmanship. But I wasn't done yet. Hidden in the treehouse design was my real gift to Blake, and my real message to the family. Built into the reading nook were books about kids overcoming challenges, about adopted children finding their place, about families that choose each other instead of just sharing DNA. In a secret compartment, I'd placed letters I'd written to Blake over the years, all the thoughts I'd wanted to share with my little brother, but never had the chance to express. The final blueprint I prepared wasn't just for the treehouse. It was for a complete renovation of the Whitman estate, making it more sustainable, more accessible, more family-friendly. And included in those plans was a studio space where I could work when I visited, because this gift came with a proposal. I wanted to come home, not as the grateful adopted child, but as the successful architect daughter who'd built something worthy of respect. If you've ever had the power to choose revenge or reconciliation, you know how tempting it is to make people pay for the pain they caused you. But sometimes, the most powerful choice is to build bridges instead of walls, to demonstrate the love you wish you'd received instead of withholding it like they did. What's the most generous thing you've ever done for someone who didn't deserve it? How did it change you? Share your story below. The morning of Blake's 14th birthday, I arrived at the Hamptons estate to oversee the final details of the treehouse installation. And honestly, seeing it completed took my breath away. The craftsmanship was even more spectacular than my blueprints had promised. Every joint perfectly fitted, every sustainable feature seamlessly integrated, every detail designed to spark a teenager's imagination while teaching environmental responsibility. Blake was bouncing off the walls with excitement, literally running circles around the yard, while the party setup crew arranged tables and decorations around his new treehouse centerpiece. "Olivia, this is insane," he kept saying, climbing up and down the structure like he was trying to memorize every square inch. "I can't believe you built this for me. I can't believe it's actually mine." The guest list was exactly what I'd expected. 60 of the most influential people in East Coast architecture and design, plus Blake's school friends and their equally privileged parents. Robert had clearly planned this party to showcase the Whitman family's success and Blake's bright future, never imagining that his adopted daughter would steal the show with a gift that demonstrated architectural mastery none of his guests could ignore. Victoria greeted me with genuine warmth for the first time in years, almost like she was seeing me as an adult for the first time instead of the troublesome teenager who'd left home 6 years ago. "Olivia, this is incredible," she said, studying the treehouse with professional appreciation. "I had no idea you'd become so accomplished. Robert's been following your career obsessively. He has copies of every article written about your work." But the real moment of truth came when Blake started exploring the treehouse's special features and discovered the personal touches I'd built into the design. In the reading nook, he found the collection of books I'd chosen specifically for him. On the small bookshelf, he discovered a photo timeline showing his growth from baby to teenager, pictures I'd collected from social media since I'd been away. Then he found the secret compartment containing letters I'd written to him over the years, letters I'd never sent, thoughts I'd never shared, all the love I'd felt for my little brother but never had the opportunity to express. Blake started reading one aloud, his voice cracking with emotion. "To my little brother, I've been watching you grow from far away, and I'm so proud of the person you're becoming." That's when it happened. Blake started crying. Not sad tears, but overwhelmed tears. The kind you get when you realize how much someone loves you. "Why didn't you ever send these?" he asked. "I didn't know you cared this much. I thought you left because you didn't want to be part of our family anymore." Victoria overheard and walked over, reading over Blake's shoulder. Her face went completely white as she realized the depth of connection I'd maintained with Blake, despite years of family separation. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Olivia, I had no idea. We thought you'd moved on, started your own life. We didn't realize you still—" Robert appeared, drawn by the emotional intensity, and when he saw Blake reading my letters in the treehouse I'd designed and built as a gift, something shifted in his expression. For the first time since Blake's birth, Robert looked at me like he was seeing his daughter instead of his former houseguest. "This is incredible," he said quietly, studying the treehouse's sophisticated engineering and sustainable features. "This isn't just a gift, Olivia. This is professional-grade architecture. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking our industry needs." But I wasn't finished yet. The real surprise was still coming. From my portfolio, I pulled out the blueprint for the estate renovation, my proposal to modernize the Whitman mansion with sustainable technology, accessibility features, and flexible spaces designed for a family that actually spent time together instead of just occupying the same expensive house. "This isn't just Blake's gift," I said, spreading the renovation plans across one of the party tables, while guests gathered around to look. "This is my proposal to come home, not as the grateful adopted child who should be thankful for whatever scraps of attention you throw my way, but as your daughter, the architect daughter who's built something worth respecting. But only if you want me as I am," I continued, "not as who you wanted me to be. I'm not interested in auditioning for your approval anymore. I'm offering you a partnership between equals." The silence stretched for what felt like forever, 60 prominent guests watching this family drama unfold at what was supposed to be a simple birthday party. Blake still in his treehouse, holding my letters, tears streaming down his face. Victoria looking shell-shocked. Robert studying my renovation plans with the intensity he usually reserved for multi-million-dollar projects. Finally, Blake broke the silence. "Please say yes," he called down from the treehouse. "Please let Olivia come home. I want my sister back." That's when Robert looked up from my blueprints, tears in his eyes for the first time since Blake's birth. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, we want you to come home. We want you as our partner, our daughter, our family. We're sorry it took us so long to see what we'd lost." The party guests burst into applause, but honestly, I barely heard them. All I could hear was Blake laughing with joy in his treehouse, Victoria crying happy tears, and Robert saying the words I'd waited 29 years to hear. "Welcome home, daughter." Sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building something so beautiful that they can't help but see your worth. Sometimes love wins not through force, but through architecture. Have you ever had a moment when someone finally saw your true value? How did it feel to be recognized for who you really are? Share that story in the comments. The family's response to my homecoming was immediate and overwhelming. Blake refused to sleep in his regular bed that first week, camping out in his treehouse every night like he was afraid it might disappear if he wasn't guarding it. Victoria asked me to stay for the entire weekend, our first real mother-daughter time since I was 11, and we talked for hours about everything we'd missed in each other's lives. Robert's reaction was the most surprising. He offered to fund the entire estate renovation as his investment in our family's future, and when I showed him my sustainable design innovations, he asked if I'd consider opening a New York branch of Reed Adaptive Architecture. "I want to learn from you," he said, studying my environmental building techniques with genuine respect. "I want Whitman and Associates to partner with you on projects that actually matter." Helena Whitman, who had spent years treating me like hired help, quietly told Robert she'd been wrong about me. "That girl has more talent and character than most of our bloodline ever will," she admitted, watching Blake show off his treehouse to his friends. We were fools not to see it sooner. The renovation project became our family healing process. Every sustainable feature we installed, every space we redesigned for actual family connection instead of social media perfection, every choice we made together instead of Robert dictating from his architect throne, It all represented the new family dynamic we were building. Blake became my unofficial assistant, fascinated by sustainable construction and eager to learn everything about environmental design. "Can you teach me to do what you do?" he asked one afternoon while we reviewed plans for his new workshop space. "I want to build things that help people and the planet too." Victoria surprised everyone by revealing a genuine talent for interior design that went far beyond expensive furniture arrangement. She started researching sustainable materials and eco-friendly decorating techniques, transforming from passive consumer to active contributor. "I want to earn my place in this renovation," she told me. "I want to contribute something meaningful instead of just writing checks." The local architecture community took notice of our collaboration. Architectural Digest featured our renovation as a cover story about historic preservation meets environmental innovation, showcasing how traditional Hamptons luxury could be transformed into sustainable family living. Other wealthy families started hiring our Whitman Reed partnership to modernize their own estates. Most importantly, Blake and I established new traditions that had nothing to do with money or status. Weekly treehouse dinners where we'd cook simple meals together and talk about everything from school drama to environmental science. He started asking real questions about my childhood, wanting to understand my perspective on growing up as the adopted outsider. "I'm sorry they made you feel like you didn't belong," he told me one evening as we watched sunset from his treehouse deck. "I didn't understand when I was little, but I get it now. You were always my sister, even when they weren't treating you like their daughter." Robert began including me in client meetings, presenting our partnership as the future of sustainable luxury design. But more than the professional collaboration, he started treating me like the adult daughter I'd become instead of the disappointing teenager who'd left home years ago. He asked about my life in London, my relationship with Marcus, my dreams for the future. Victoria made an effort to understand my work and my values, reading books about environmental architecture and sustainable living. She started volunteering with organizations that supported aged-out foster youth, saying she wanted to help kids who'd experienced what I had experienced. "I can't change how we treated you," she said, "but maybe I can do better for other children who need families that won't give up on them." The biggest change was in how we communicated. Instead of the old dynamic where Robert made decisions and everyone else adapted, we became a family that actually discussed things, that considered everyone's needs and opinions. Blake got a voice in family decisions. Victoria's creativity was valued and encouraged. My expertise was respected and utilized. 6 months after the renovation was completed, Architectural Record featured our family story in an article about architecture as healing practice. The writer focused on how thoughtful design could repair damaged relationships and create space for authentic connection instead of performative family life. But the real measure of our success wasn't media coverage or industry recognition. It was Blake bringing friends home regularly for the first time in his life, confident that his family would welcome them. It was Victoria and I having genuine conversations about everything from career goals to relationship advice. It was Robert and me collaborating on projects that combined his business expertise with my environmental vision. We weren't perfect. 14 years of family dysfunction doesn't disappear overnight. But we were real in ways we'd never been before. We were choosing each other every day through actions, not just shared DNA or legal documents. If you're in a complicated family situation, know that it's possible to rebuild relationships that seemed permanently broken. It requires everyone choosing growth over pride, love over control, authenticity over performance. But when it works, when people choose to see you and value you for who you actually are, there's no feeling quite like coming home to a family that finally deserves you. What relationship in your life needs rebuilding? What would it take for you to extend that first olive branch? Share your thoughts below. 5 years later, I'm standing in that same treehouse where Blake and I had our breakthrough conversation. But now I'm holding my 6-month-old daughter Emma while Blake, now 19 and a freshman at MIT following in my footsteps, reads architecture books and asks me questions about sustainable design theory that would impress most graduate students. Reed Adaptive Architecture has become the leading sustainable luxury firm on the East Coast. We've designed carbon-negative resorts, regenerative housing communities, and office buildings that actually improve their environments instead of just occupying space. But more importantly, we've created the Second Chances Scholarship Program that funds architecture education for kids aging out of foster care Kids like I used to be. Blake is majoring in environmental engineering with a focus on sustainable construction. And honestly, watching him develop his own passion for building a better world has been one of my greatest joys. I want to design cities that can adapt to climate change, he told me during his last visit home. I want to build things that help people instead of just impressing them. Victoria has become my closest friend and my biggest supporter, promoting our firm's work through her social connections and volunteering as a mentor for young women in architecture. She established a nonprofit organization that connects families affected by adoption trauma, helping parents understand how to love children they didn't birth without making them feel like consolation prizes. Robert and I now co-teach a sustainable design course at the local community college, and watching him learn from me, really learn with genuine humility and respect, has healed parts of our relationship I didn't think were repairable. He's adapted his entire business model to prioritize environmental responsibility over pure profit. And he tells everyone that his daughter taught him what architecture should really accomplish. The Hamptons estate has become a model of sustainable luxury living, featured in magazines and architecture tours as proof that environmental responsibility and beautiful design aren't mutually exclusive. But more than that, it's become a home where everyone belongs, where love isn't rationed based on DNA, where success is measured by how much you lift others up instead of how much you accumulate for yourself. Marcus and I got married in Blake's treehouse 3 years ago, with Robert walking me down a path he'd helped design, Victoria coordinating flowers grown in our organic garden, and Blake officiating the ceremony he'd insisted on learning to perform. Helena Whitman, now 87 and dealing with early dementia, sometimes forgets the complicated history and just calls me my brilliant granddaughter, which honestly feels like the truest thing she's ever said about me. Emma will grow up knowing she's chosen and cherished, but she'll also grow up understanding that love is something you do, not just something you feel. She'll learn that families are built through consistent actions, not just genetic connections. She'll know that her worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. Last month, a young woman named Sarah contacted our scholarship program. She'd aged out of foster care at 18, worked multiple jobs to pay for community college, and dreamed of becoming an architect who designed affordable housing for families like hers. Reading her application, I saw myself at 18, brilliant, determined, and desperate for someone to believe in her potential. We offered Sarah a full scholarship, an internship at our firm, and something I'd never had at her age: a chosen family of mentors who understood her journey and believed in her dreams. Watching her face light up when we told her the news reminded me why I'd chosen reconciliation over revenge, why I'd built bridges instead of walls. The blueprint I never signed wasn't the one for any building. It was the blueprint for the family I thought I wanted. The family that required me to be smaller, quieter, more grateful than I actually was. The blueprint I did sign was for the family we built together through choice and effort and genuine love that doesn't come with conditions. Architecture taught me that the strongest foundations are built to last, that the most beautiful structures are designed to welcome people in, and that sustainable design means creating something that makes the world better for future generations. Those same principles apply to families. If you're watching this and you're still waiting for family members to see your worth, know that you have the power to build something better. You can choose people who celebrate your success instead of diminishing it. You can create traditions based on love instead of obligation. You can architect a life that reflects your actual value instead of other people's limitations. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family that's meant to raise you. Sometimes the family that adopts you needs time to learn how to love you properly. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very patient and very brave, you get the chance to build something beautiful together from the broken pieces of what came before. The strongest structures aren't built to keep people out. They're designed to welcome everyone home. That's the blueprint I finally signed, and it's the legacy I'm building for Emma and for every kid who's ever felt like they were auditioning for love in their own family. What blueprint are you signing for your life? What kind of foundation are you building for the people who matter to you? Let me know in the comments, and remember, you have the power to architect your own belonging. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes knowing you're not alone in your journey is the first step toward building something better. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about choosing yourself, building bridges, and creating the life you actually deserve. The strongest buildings are the ones designed to last forever. The strongest families are the ones that choose each other every single day.